Starting of the day. So, Skillsfest 4, why here, why now? Last Skillsfest 3, surprisingly, we kind of talked about complex adaptive systems at the end, and we talked about generativity. So, we're really going to spend our time focusing on those two things today. And when I thought about this, thought about the last couple of years, we're kind of in a very interesting world. Would you agree? Lots of different things are going on. Some good, some bad, some ugly. But it feels like we're on this edge or this cusp of something. I don't know what that something is, but I'll make an attempt to kind of discuss it. And I think of patterns, right? When we think of complex adaptive systems, and we think, Mike's going to talk about this, and a lot of people are talking today about various things. Even, I think, Ted, you're going to be talking a little bit about this as well. Are we looking at the fish, or are we looking at the birds? And are we on this phase change of something? And, you know, everybody uses the word paradigm shift, so it sounds kind of cliche nowadays. If you read the book on it, it's about, you know, everybody who was in the last paradigm has to die before the next one works. So maybe we can change that a little bit in the way that we think about this. But then I was thinking about the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Has anybody listened to the Malcolm Gladwell piece on the Boston Tea Party? Oh, then I can make everything on it. So, what do you know about the Boston Tea Party? What happened?
That.
History books, what happened? Threw some tea overboard. Taxation without representation. What else? People dressed up, right? And kind of took the tea over. So, so if you dig into some of the history and you actually dig into the insurance records of ships, because insurance records of ships tell you what you really do, while what you might tell in history books is completely different. What you find is most of our patriots were drug smugglers. And I say drug smugglers because tea was kind of the drug. It had high caffeine. It was kind of the drug of the day. And these drug smugglers were actually about 80% of the tea market was going through our smugglers. John Hancock was a good one. He wrote his name on there big, right? Because it's like, this is me. They were going around the system because they didn't want to get taxed. Because taxes were high. So they went in, they got their stuff through Amsterdam, brought it into the country, and they were able to kind of get away from the tax. The Tea Act actually lowered the taxes on tea, didn't raise them. And that kind of pissed off the drug smugglers. Because guess what? Now the tea coming from England was costing about what the tea coming from China through Amsterdam was coming to the drug smugglers. And so they said, no, we want to throw the tea overboard. And so, you know, we get history, first of all, and history, obviously this was a phase change of some sort, right? Taxation without representation, but what it really was a bunch of hoodlums that wanted to keep their power to ensure that they could make the rents in the system so that they could be popular, powerful. And then what happens about a generation later, you know, liberty, equality, and so on, right? But we go to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so, you know, Thomas Jefferson, good guy. Well, it was really life, liberty, pursuit of happiness for white men, right? Because it was for men. All men are created equal. It wasn't women. And it wasn't black. As a matter of fact, he had 5 illegitimate children, right? With a woman, a slave woman that he owned. And so, yes, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? But at the same time, for who, for what, for all. And then I went to with liberty and justice for all. Do you know what that's from? Pledge of Allegiance. Do you know what the original Pledge of Allegiance was? I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So what pieces were missing? United States of America. The guy who wrote it said, I'm going to write this as a pledge of allegiance to any flag and not just to American flag in the 1890s. In the 1920s, the United States said, hey, that sounds pretty good. We'll use it. Under God. When did that come in? 1950s, and it was Eisenhower that put it in because he was going against the communists, and he wanted to kind of go against the Cold War, so under God added into the Pledge of Allegiance. So again, I'm not a big history buff actually, but it's interesting to see how history and how we interpret history kind of changes. Another example, anybody know who this is? Andrew Carnegie. Or Carnegie, I guess if you're like, it's kind of like, you know, if you're like more high up, it's Carnegie. If it's Carnegie, if you're down to earth, and it's like tomato, tomato, and things like that. Well, palaces for the people, right? So palaces for the people is what he called libraries, and he built hundreds and hundreds of libraries with his $500 and some $60 million buyout from J.P. Morgan when they took Carnegie Steel and made it into U.S. Steel. But, oh, that wasn't the right one. Is it a laser? No. Oh, okay. So, that's the end of my presentation. You may have to figure out what happened there. But, so the Homestead strike that was in there was basically, he hired 300 Pinkerton people to break a strike that killed, I don't know, it's like 180 people, to make sure that their wages would stay nice and low so that they could make profits that would then allow them to do that. She ran away. That's kind of scary. It runs away. Okay. So I ask you today to be curious, like George. Be curious to what we're doing. Two things that have come to my mind. One is equity, right? So in the 1880s, you know, there's always somebody who is discriminated against. And so when the big immigration came in the 1880s, you saw a lot of discrimination around Polish people, around Irish people, around people who were different, who talked differently, who spoke differently. But it's a lot easier over time to kind of blend in if you're Irish, German, and Polish. And so I thought about, well, what differentiates people that makes it easy to discriminate? And obviously, color of skin is one example. Another one, I met George Elbaum, and he was in the Warsaw, I met him earlier this year, he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. And grew up in the Warsaw Ghetto. He's Jewish, and his mom got him to some Polish families. But he told a story about he was eating soup at a table, and a German SS guy came into his Polish family, and they were always, the SS were always looking to see if some kid would be afraid. And if they were afraid, then what would they do? How can you tell if you're a Jewish guy? You just pull your pants down because you're circumcised. Nobody else circumcised. So again, it's another visual way to differentiate or to actually discriminate against a person. He smiled, and so he didn't look fearful. He was hungry for soup. And the German guy did not ask him to drop his pants, and he was able to eventually move on, got 4 degrees from MIT, and was in the defense industry. So that's just one. We tend to discriminate based on ways that we can discriminate. And sometimes it's easier to discriminate with our eyes, or if we hear someone speaks differently, or if someone's acting differently. Another one is children's mental health, and I know, John, I don't know, children went hard. Oh, there you are. So I'm sure you'll be talking something in this space and some other people, but if you start looking at our entire system, if our kids are kind of screwed up before adolescence, they're just going to be really screwed up after adolescence, and it takes a lot more effort and energy and time to work through problems with adults than it is to work through problems with kids before adolescence. So if we start thinking about where are the ways we can intervene in our system. That got me to this, a bunch of work that's been going on in our area and just thinking about things. And so if you think of obesity, addiction, mental health as symptoms of something deeper, what might that something deeper be? And so some of us have been looking at, well, maybe it's hopelessness and isolation, and because we're hopeless, we don't, we get depressed, we don't feel good, and so that, but why might that be? So two things that come to mind is perfection and consumption. So one is perfection. We are kind of tuned to try to be the best we can be all the time, every place, in all domains. And if we're not, we're really good at figuring out how to get people to consume things because they feel inadequate related to what they do. So the consumption model, which actually gets exacerbated by social media because you now can target people perfectly into their insecurities, allows you to buy exactly what you want. I bought this watch for my son. He's like, "Dear hockey son, I know in the future, you know, that you can always be with me if I give you this watch, and I love you forever," right? And I give it to him for Christmas. He throws it aside. I don't think he's ever worn it. But they actually got $149 out of me because it's just like, boom, hockey season, like my kids, so on and so forth. But what might be driving perfection and consumption? So one hypothesis is, are we solving our problems in such a way that we're hurting ourselves? Or are we trying to dissolve our problems in ways that help the world? Are we really forcing, or are we going with the flow? And so that's a question. Another one is growth. If we're always trying to consume and to grow, like every publicly traded company needs to make sure they have an earnings growth, and they have to hit it by the quarter, we do really stupid things to hit those numbers. And not things that allow us to be hopeful and full of joy and wealth. Wealth in, like, not economic wealth, but if we're always trying to grow, I don't think unfettered infinite growth has ever worked in a system that I've seen that's natural or even that's not natural. And mathematically, you see collapse happen when you have group things that grow forever. So, anybody read Sir John Glubb? I wouldn't want that name, that's for sure. But Sir John Glubb wrote a small little thing. Gene Bellinger is going to speak later, talk The Fate of Empires in Search for Survival. And basically his hypothesis is empires last about 250 years. So we take 1773 to 250, it's about December 2023, which is coming up in our little thing. But if you take the Assyrian, the Persian, the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Spain, Romanov Russia, Britain, you got a variation of 208 to 267 on kind of empires. And here are some of the summary of some of those empires. So, in a surprising manner, 250 years emerges as the average length of national greatness. The average is not varied for about 3,000 years. The stages of rise and fall seem to be pioneers, conquest, commerce, affluence, intellect, decadence marked by defensiveness, pessimism, materialism, frivolity, influx of foreigners, welfare state, a weakening of religion. Decadence is due to too long a period of wealth and power, selfishness, love of money, and the loss of a sense of duty. So, interesting. We're at this kind of interesting time, this phase change. What can we do? What can we learn? And how can we act in a way that allows us to think outside of what the current system is and understand what we can do relative to complex adaptive problem solving and generativity. And that's kind of what we're working on today. So that's my thought from the last kind of year, what's going on Skillsfest wise, and from here we're going to kind of hit right into our speaking group. Thank you.